Today we will be looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. As always, viewer discretion is advised. August 5th, 2010. 33 miners descended into the San Jose copper-gold mine near Copiapó, Chile, beginning what should have been a routine work shift. The mine was old, carved deep into the Atacama Desert Mountains, extending more than 2,300 feet, 700 meters below the surface. The miners knew the mine had problems. It had been cited for safety violations. It had a history of accidents. It was the kind of place where experienced miners understood the risks every time they went underground. But this was their job. This was how they fed their families. They descended through the mine's spiral access tunnel, riding in trucks and walking down ramps that corkscrewed into the earth, passing through different levels where ore was extracted and processed. By mid-afternoon, the 33 miners were scattered across different work areas deep in the mine, drilling, hauling, maintaining equipment, doing the hard physical labor that mining demands. At approximately 2 p.m., the mountain moved. A massive section of rock, estimated at 700,000 tons, sheared away from the mine's interior structure and collapsed. The sound was deafening, a roar of breaking rock that echoed through the tunnels and passages. Dust exploded through the mine workings, filling the air with choking particles that made breathing difficult and visibility impossible. The collapse blocked the main ramp, the spiral tunnel that served as the mine's primary access route. Hundreds of feet of passage were suddenly filled with broken rock, creating a plug of debris that sealed the upper mine off from the sections below. The 33 miners who were working in the lower levels were trapped instantly, cut off from the surface by an insurmountable barrier of collapsed stone. The miners gathered in the refuge area, a small chamber designed as an emergency shelter, equipped with basic supplies meant to sustain trapped miners until rescue could reach them. The refuge was intended to support about 10 people for 48 hours. There were 33 miners, and they had no idea how long rescue would take or if rescue was even possible. They took inventory of their supplies. They had some emergency food rations, water from underground tanks that serviced mining equipment, a few medical supplies, and their mining lamps. That was it. 33 men trapped 2,300 feet underground with enough food for maybe 2 days if carefully rationed. The miners made a critical decision. They would ration everything strictly. They divided the food into minimal portions. A spoonful of tuna, a sip of milk, a bite of peach, consumed every 48 hours. They rationed water to prevent dehydration while conserving their limited supply. They rationed their lamp batteries, keeping only minimal light to preserve power. They organized shifts, designated leaders, created structure to prevent panic and maintain hope. On the surface, rescue operations began immediately. Mine officials, government authorities, and rescue teams converged on the San Jose mine. But they faced an enormous challenge. 33 men were trapped somewhere in the lower mine, behind 700,000 tons of collapsed rock, 2,300 feet below the surface. The main access tunnel was completely blocked. No one knew if the trapped miners were alive, injured, or already dead. No one knew their exact location or condition. The rescuers couldn't simply dig through the collapsed section. It was too unstable, too massive, and any attempt to remove the debris might trigger additional collapses that would crush the trapped miners or kill rescue workers. The only option was to drill down from the surface, trying to reach the areas where the miners might have taken shelter. But drilling from the surface presented its own challenges. The mine extended 2,300 feet down, and the refugee areas were scattered through the lower workings. The rescuers needed to drill in the right location, through 2,300 feet of rock, hoping to intersect with passages where the miners might be sheltering. If they drilled in the wrong spot, they'd miss the miners entirely. Days passed, drilling operations began, massive equipment brought to the site to bore holes down through the mountain. The first drills were exploratory, narrow boreholes designed to probe the lower mine, searching for open spaces, trying to determine if the areas where miners might have sheltered were accessible or had been crushed by the collapse. The trapped miners could hear the drilling. The sound of drill bits grinding through rock echoed through the mine passages, a distant rumble that told them people were trying to reach them. But the sounds came from the wrong direction sometimes, or stopped before breaking through, or seemed to move away. Days turned into a week, then 2 weeks, and still no breakthrough came. The miners were starving. The tiny food rations they had allocated, meant to last perhaps a week if they were lucky, were running out. They were drinking water contaminated with mineral oil from the mine's machinery, because it was the only water available. They were losing weight rapidly, their bodies consuming muscle and fat as starvation set in. Some miners became seriously ill, suffering from infections, dehydration, and the psychological stress of being buried alive with no certainty that rescue would ever come. 17 days after the collapse, on August 22nd, a narrow borehole finally broke through into the refuge area. The drill bit had successfully navigated 2,300 feet down through the mountain and intersected with the shelter where the miners had gathered. When the drill was extracted, a note was attached to it, a message written in red marker that would become one of the most famous communications in mining history. All 33 miners were alive, after 17 days of uncertainty, after 17 days of drilling and hoping and fearing the worst. Rescuers finally had confirmation that the trapped men had survived the initial collapse and were still fighting to stay alive. The discovery that all 33 were alive transformed the rescue from a recovery operation to a race against time. The miners were alive, but starving, weak, and couldn't survive indefinitely in their underground prison. The small borehole that had reached them was too narrow to extract people through. It was only about 6 inches, 15 centimeters in diameter, useful for communication and sending supplies, but useless for rescue. Supplies began flowing down through the borehole. They received medical guidance through the borehole, instructions from doctors on the surface about how to treat various ailments and maintain health while waiting for rescue. But rescue still seemed impossibly distant. The narrow borehole was one thing. Drilling a hole wide enough to extract a human being through 2,300 feet of rock was entirely different. Engineers calculated that they needed to drill a shaft approximately 28 inches, 71 centimeters in diameter, to accommodate a rescue capsule that could bring the miners out one at a time. 3 different drilling operations began simultaneously, each using different approaches and equipment, racing to be the first to complete a rescue shaft. Plan A used a large drill to widen an existing borehole. Plan B started fresh with a specialized drilling rig. Plan C used an oil drilling platform adapted for rescue operations. The 3 teams worked around the clock, grinding through rock, meter by meter, trying to reach the trapped miners. Weeks passed. The miners established a routine in their underground prison. They organized work shifts, exercise programs, medical monitoring. August turned into September. September moved toward October. The trapped miners approached 2 months underground, 69 days of living in a space smaller than a typical apartment, 2,300 feet below the surface, surviving on supplies sent down through narrow boreholes, waiting for a rescue shaft that seemed to take forever. On October 9th, Plan B, the specialized drilling rig, broke through to the refuge area at 2,300 feet depth. The rescue shaft was complete, a 28-inch diameter tunnel connecting the surface to the trapped miners. Engineers immediately began preparing for extraction. A rescue capsule was designed and built specifically for this operation. Named Phoenix, the capsule was a narrow metal tube barely wide enough for one person, equipped with oxygen, communications, and an escape hatch. The capsule would be lowered through the rescue shaft on a cable, load 1 miner, then be hauled back to the surface through the narrow tunnel. The process would have to be repeated 33 times to extract all the trapped men. October 12th, 2010. 69 days after the collapse, the rescue operation began. The Phoenix capsule was lowered into the rescue shaft, beginning its slow journey down through 2,300 feet of rock to reach the waiting miners. The operation was broadcast live worldwide. Millions of people in Chile and around the globe watched as the dramatic rescue unfolded. The first miner to be extracted was Florencio Avalos, chosen because he was calm and could report on the capsule's performance. The Phoenix descended through the narrow shaft, reached the refuge area, and Avalos climbed inside. The capsule was sealed and began its ascent, a slow, grinding climb through 2,300 feet of rock, taking approximately 15 minutes to reach the surface. When Avalos emerged from the rescue shaft, Stepping out of the Phoenix capsule into Chilean night air, the crowd at the mine erupted. The first miner was out. The rescue was working. 1 down, 32 to go. The extraction continued through the night and into the next day. 1 miner at a time, the Phoenix descended and ascended, bringing trapped men back to the surface. Some miners were in better condition than others. All had lost significant weight. Some had dropped 20 to 30 pounds during their 69-day ordeal. All showed signs of prolonged stress and confinement, but all were alive. The operation took approximately 24 hours to complete. 24 hours of continuous capsule trips, each descent and ascent taking about 30 minutes round trip. Each extraction bringing another miner back to the world he'd been cut off from for more than 2 months. The last miner extracted was Luis Urzua, the shift supervisor who had been the leader underground, who had helped organize the miners and maintain hope during the darkest days when they didn't know if rescue would ever come. Urzua climbed into the Phoenix for the final ascent, leaving the refuge area empty for the first time since 33 men had gathered there on August 5th. The 33 miners became celebrities, their story told in books, documentaries, and films. The San Jose mine was permanently sealed after the rescue. The mountain that had trapped 33 men for 69 days was declared too unstable for further mining operations. March 18, 1984, Spring Valley Caverns, Fillmore County, Minnesota. 15 spelunkers descended into the earth that morning with maps, survey equipment, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing your environment. This wasn't extreme caving, no tight squeezes, no underwater passages, no rappelling into bottomless pits. Spring Valley Caverns is mostly walking passage, the kind of cave system where you move through chambers tall enough to stand in, where the rock is stable, where the dangers are measured and manageable. At least, that's what it was designed to be. Years earlier, someone had tried to commercialize this place. They'd built stairs at the vertical drops, proper wooden structures with handrails, the kind that would let tourists descend safely into the underground without needing climbing gear or technical knowledge. But commercial cave tours don't last forever. The project failed, the tourists stopped coming, and the infrastructure they'd left behind began to rot. By March 1984, those stairs were gone, collapsed into splinters, reclaimed by moisture and time and the patient decay that happens when you abandon wooden structures in a cave environment. What remained was a single 3/4-inch galvanized pipe, vertical, stubborn, the last surviving piece of a staircase that no longer existed. The group split into groups of 3 or 4. Their mission was methodical: push remaining leads, survey unexplored passages, map the sections that still existed as blank spaces in the cave's official documentation. Professional, organized, routine. One group carried a painter's wooden ladder, the kind you buy at a hardware store, rated for domestic use, designed for reaching gutters and painting ceilings. In the context of home improvement, it's perfectly adequate. In the context of cave exploration, it's a calculated risk. But caves don't always offer perfect solutions. Sometimes you work with what you have. And at the southwest end of the Grand Canyon, a section of Spring Valley named for its scale, not its geography, there's a 5 to 6 meter wall of breakdown that separates lower passage from upper passage. Breakdown, in caving terms, means collapsed rock. Boulders that fell from the ceiling decades or centuries ago and piled into unstable slopes that shift when you climb them and crumble when you trust them. This particular wall stood between the group and the passage they needed to reach. The wooden ladder was their solution. They set it up against the breakdown wall, leaning it next to the galvanized pipe, the ghost of a staircase that used to make this easy. And immediately, they discovered a problem. The ladder was a foot shorter than the pitch. Not catastrophically short, not unusably short. Just short enough that the top rung didn't quite reach the upper level, which meant climbers would need to make a final commitment move, grabbing the pipe, pulling themselves over the edge, transitioning from ladder to solid ground without a secure middle step. Manageable, but not ideal. The group used it anyway. 3 or 4 members at a time, ascending and descending throughout the day as they moved between the lower and upper sections of the cave, surveying passages, pushing leads, doing the quiet, meticulous work that turns blank cave maps into documented systems. Hours passed. The work continued. Nobody fell. Late in the trip, the groups began consolidating for the exit. Cave expeditions follow a rhythm. You go in fresh, you work methodically. And then, at the end, when the survey is done and the excitement has faded, and your body is starting to remember how long you've been underground, you head out. This is the most dangerous part. Not because the cave changes, but because you do. Fatigue sets in. Concentration drifts. The mind starts thinking about the surface, about food, warmth, the car ride home, instead of focusing on the immediate task of moving safely through an environment that still demands precision. Calvin Alexander was 41 years old, experienced, not reckless, not careless by nature. He approached the ladder at the breakdown wall, ready to descend to the lower passage and continue toward the exit. Another member was near the bottom of the ladder, not blocking it, just positioned close enough that conversation felt natural. Alexander reached the top of the pitch. The ladder was there, leaning against the breakdown, 1 foot shorter than it needed to be. The galvanized pipe stood next to it, solid, vertical, reliable. He grabbed the pipe with one hand, and then, in a moment of thoughtless efficiency, he attempted to do 2 things at once. He tried to step down onto the first rung of the ladder and turn his body around to face the wall, executing the transition from upper passage to ladder in a single fluid motion instead of breaking it into careful steps. It's the kind of move you make when you're confident, when you've done this before, when your brain is already 3 steps ahead, thinking about the next section of passage instead of the current one. His foot missed the rung, gravity took over. Alexander fell backward off the top of the breakdown wall. His body rotated as he dropped. His foot caught between the first and second rungs of the ladder, a chaotic, unplanned entanglement that stopped his fall but left him in the worst possible position. Upside down, hanging from the ladder by one trapped foot, his body suspended over the breakdown below, his shoulders slamming into the rock wall with enough force to dislocate the joint. He was still holding the galvanized pipe. That pipe, the last remnant of a failed commercial staircase, the only piece of infrastructure still standing after years of decay, was the only thing keeping him from completing the fall, his hand locked around it. 1 arm, 1 pipe, 1 chance. Below him, 5 to 6 meters of unstable breakdown, boulders that could shift on impact, edges that could fracture bone, a fall that could easily turn from injury to fatality depending on how his body landed. But his foot was caught. That single random entanglement between ladder rungs, the kind of accident that sounds absurd when you describe it later, was the only reason he didn't finish falling. The group member near the bottom of the ladder reacted immediately. No panic, no hesitation, just movement. He grabbed Alexander and helped rotate him upright, turning him from an upside-down suspension into a position where gravity was working with the rescue instead of against it. Other group members moved in, hands on his body, voices calm and clear, stabilizing him, guiding him down the ladder, 1 rung at a time, until his feet reached solid ground. Alexander stood on the breakdown pile, breathing hard, shoulders screaming, adrenaline masking the full extent of the injury. Someone asked if he was okay. He said yes, because at that moment, okay meant alive and conscious and able to move. The shoulder hurt, but pain is information, and the information it was giving him was that he was still functional enough to exit the cave under his own power. So, that's what he did. The group continued toward the surface. Alexander walked with them, through the remaining passage, past the sections they'd surveyed earlier, out through the entrance and into March daylight. Only when he reached the surface did the full damage reveal itself. Medical examination confirmed what his body had been trying to tell him since the moment his shoulder hit the wall. Dislocated shoulder, the ball of the humerus forced out of the socket with enough violence to chip bone. 1 small bone fragment floating in the joint. A souvenir from the impact, a permanent reminder that the difference between accident and fatality had been measured in inches. If his foot hadn't caught in the ladder rung, he would have fallen 5 to 6 meters onto unstable breakdown, head first. The kind of fall where the best case scenario is paralysis, and the realistic scenario is immediate death from skull fracture or spinal damage, but his foot caught. And that random entanglement, the chaotic physics of a body falling through space and intersecting with a wooden ladder at precisely the right angle, saved his life. Later, Alexander, in the report, admitted the truth with the kind of brutal self-awareness that only comes from surviving your own mistake. This was the result of a momentary, thoughtless carelessness. Not equipment failure, not environmental hazard, not bad luck, carelessness. The kind that happens at the end of a trip when your brain is already thinking about the surface and your body is running on autopilot, and the task in front of you feels so routine that you stop treating it with the respect it deserves. He'd attempted to step down and turn around simultaneously, a move that would have worked if he'd been paying full attention, but became catastrophic the moment his concentration drifted. The report concluded with a warning that every spelunker knows but sometimes forgets. The need to concentrate becomes more important as it becomes more difficult. Not physically difficult, mentally difficult. Because fatigue doesn't just drain your muscles, it drains your focus. And in environments where a single misstep can mean a 5-meter fall onto breakdown, focus is the only thing standing between routine and disaster.